tonight, and thank you to the staff here at Eastern Rapids High School for hosting us in this beautiful venue. My name is Catherine Condon, and I am Representative Amash's District Director. As always, please feel free to reach out to our office if we can ever assist with a federal agency, whether it's the VA, Social Security, IRS, we're always happy to help. Or if you just want to share a message with the Congressman, we're always happy to pass those along as well. But I know that you're here for the town hall tonight, which will begin shortly. Representative Amash will first give an update on what's going on in DC and then take questions from the crowd. We just ask that you don't interrupt those around you when they're asking questions or if the Congressman's answering, so you can get to as many as possible, as I know that most of you do have questions. And of course, remember to turn off those cell phones so they don't ring. I know I sometimes forget to turn mine off as well. So with that, I will pass over the mic to Representative Amash.
Thanks, Catherine. And Catherine's my district director, so if you have any issues that are federal issues that you need help with, you can always contact Catherine at our district office. Our district office is right downtown in the federal court building. And we can help you with things like Social Security benefits, Medicare, veterans benefits. If you have immigration issues, you need help with an immigration issue, we can help you with that. So please feel free to contact our office to let us know if we can assist. I think a lot of people, when they think about their congressman, they think about what goes on in DC, and they maybe aren't as aware about the kind of things we can help with, where you might have a particular problem that is related to a federal issue. We can help get you in contact with the right agency and help you address that issue. So please feel free to reach out to us. I'll start with a brief update and then I'll open up for questions. And let me talk a little bit first about a topic that doesn't get a lot of attention lately, and that's federal spending. With all the stuff going on in Washington, and of course, healthcare legislation and all the rest, I think people lose sight of our budget, our $20 trillion debt, and federal spending. So we recently had a vote on a bill called the Make America Secure Appropriations Act. I voted no on this piece of legislation. It was a combination of defense appropriations, legislative branch appropriations, military construction and veterans affairs, and also energy and water appropriations. So they combined these four appropriations bills into one bill that was one gigantic bill. And there was some discussion about doing 12 bills combined into one bill before, but they settled on doing 4. I believe very firmly that they should do each of these appropriations bills separately. So when we're looking at a legislative issue, we should decide on that issue and then not attach it to other issues. So that when we're deciding how much we're going to spend on our veterans, or on defense spending, or energy spending, each one should be decided separately so we can have a clean, separate vote on it to decide the appropriate funding level. The reason they like to attach the bills together is because it makes it more difficult to vote no. Because there will always be something in one of these bills that will be politically dicey for someone to oppose. So, for example, when they attach stuff to the veterans bill, well then if you vote no on it, they say, well, you're not for our veterans. Or if they attach something to a defense bill, they say, well, you don't want to fund the troops. So they intentionally link all of these bills together to make it difficult to oppose the bills. But of course I voted no because I really don't care about the politics. The total spending was $818.6 billion in these 4 bills. So 4 bills, $818.6 billion, which is an 8% increase from the previous year. So they're increasing spending. which is a little bit disappointing for me as a Republican, because Republicans, when they were in control of everything, are supposed to be cutting spending, but here's an 8% increase in spending. I've commented before on the inability or difficulty of amending these bills. So I offered an amendment, for example, to end the sale of cluster munitions to Saudi Arabia. So to prohibit the sale of cluster munitions to Saudi Arabia. I don't think we should be involved in that war in Yemen. I don't think we should be sending weapons to Saudi Arabia, a country with a terrible human rights record, that is actually in the process. They're going to behead a student that was supposed to be coming here to West Michigan, actually, and the student was caught protesting, of all things, and they sentenced him to beheading. And yet, the U.S. is approving the sale of weapons, which didn't start under President Trump. That was under President Obama and previous presidents. Also approved of those sales and allowed these weapons to go to Saudi Arabia. But I think that we should not be selling these weapons. I offered an amendment, and my amendment was ruled out of order. So they didn't even allow it to come to the floor for a vote. And I've commented before how the process is set up so that if you have an amendment that does something and will pass, they will not allow a vote on it. The only time they really allow votes on amendments is if the amendment has no chance of passing. In other words, it's so unpopular that they know it has no chance of passing, so they might as well just put it on the floor and it will fail. Or the amendment has a chance of passing, but it doesn't really do anything. And there are lots of amendments like that. That's probably the most common amendment. The reason a lot of members of Congress offer those amendments is so they can then run a commercial later on saying they did something for someone. But the amendment actually does practically nothing. It'll often be some kind of study or something very basic that doesn't really amount to much of anything. And so you have all sorts of amendments like that. But on this bill, for example, 334 amendments were offered to the bill. And we only had 16 amendment votes. So 16 votes on the House floor. 16 actual votes out of 334 that were offered. 12 of those failed and 4 were accepted. And I can't remember the 4 that were accepted that passed on the House floor, but I can guess that they didn't do much of anything. And that's why they were adopted. So we had that bill. That was pretty recent. That was this past week. And prior to that, we had the National Defense Authorization Act. So this was the appropriations bill, which appropriated money for, so it's essentially a spending bill. It allows the money, it actually sends the money out. It says, Treasury, you can send out the money for these purposes. Before that, we had the National Defense Authorization Act. So this is the bill that authorizes defense spending and defense programs. So it authorizes the programs. The appropriations bill is the spending bill that actually sends the money out. But the authorization bill is the one that authorizes the program. So the National Defense Authorization Act. I also voted no on that bill. That bill was authorizing $688.7 billion, which was a 15% increase. So a 15% increase in spending. And I also offered an amendment on that bill, the same amendment on cluster munitions to Saudi Arabia, which also did not receive a vote because, as I've mentioned before, the leadership teams, whether they're Republican or Democrat, try to prevent votes from coming to the floor if they think they'll pass and they do something. So that was a couple weeks ago now, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. Let me talk a little bit about, so I've talked about the problems with the amendment process. There's also a problem with getting recorded votes on things generally. So a lot of things that pass in Congress pass by voice vote. And members of Congress might not even be on the House floor passing these bills. Believe it or not, they can pass just about anything without anyone being there. All they need is they need someone to be in the speaker's chair, and they need someone to be offering something. And you might say to yourself, well, don't they have to have a quorum? Yeah, they do. They have to have a quorum under House rules. The problem is, if no one is on the House floor to object to the lack of a quorum, they treat it as though there is a quorum. So you have to be there to object to the lack of a quorum. But they often bring these bills up at times that where you'll be unaware that they're voting on this bill. They might bring it up early in the morning, late at night. You don't know when it's going to be. They often don't give you enough of a heads up to plan your schedule so you can be there. And that's on purpose. So we had a particularly egregious example of this a few weeks ago, where the Department of Homeland Security was going to be reauthorized by voice vote. Now, the Department of Homeland Security hasn't been authorized since 2002. It was authorized at that time, it hasn't been reauthorized. So it's due for a reauthorization. My staff discovered, that they were going to try to bring this up at some obscure time late in the week. And we figured, well, if they're bringing it up at that obscure time, they must be trying to pass it by voice vote as well. Because it wasn't on anyone's radar. They didn't put it on the radar of any of the members of Congress, really. So I went to the House floor at the time that it came up. We figured out what it was going to be. And I went to the House floor. And this is a 575-page bill. So 575-page bill that reauthorizes the Department of Homeland Security. And I went up to the chairman of the committee, and I asked him if he was going to have a voice vote on it, or if he was going to have the yeas and nays. And he said, well, leadership would really like to have a voice vote on this. And the Democrats also wanted a voice vote. Both sides did. Because neither side was interested in having the American people see how they were going to vote on this. The Democrats had their own particular political reasons for not wanting to have a vote on it, because it touches a lot of immigration issues and other issues. And many of these Democrats, because it's the Department of Homeland Security, they want to vote yes on it to show that they're strong on security, Homeland Security. But they also want to vote no because they don't like some of the immigration actions of ICE and the Department generally. So Democrats also didn't want a recorded vote on it. Everybody in leadership and the establishments of both sides, they just wanted this to pass with no one knowing what was going on. So I told the chairman of the committee, well, you're not going to ask for yeas and nays, and if the Democrats aren't going to ask for yeas and nays, then I'm going to. And I sat there prepared to ask for the yeas and nays when the debate was done. It was a short debate because they did it on suspension. We're trying to just move through it as quickly as possible before someone caught on. So I sat there, and then right before I was about to ask for the yeas and nays, a staff person for the chairman comes up to me and says, oh, the chairman will ask for the yeas and nays. Because apparently he had talked to leadership, and leadership didn't want to be embarrassed by having some other member not on the committee, not connected to the bill directly, asking for the yeas and nays and putting them all on the spot, highlighting how they were trying to sneak it past everyone. So the chairman did ask for the yeas and nays. And I voted no. Some Republicans voted no, not a lot. There were about, I think, 40-something Democrats that voted no. But in any case, the most important part about it was getting everyone on the record. And I don't think that you should pass 575-page bills that authorize whole departments of government without any real debate, without any amendments offered, without much of a notice, and then pass it on voice vote. That's not the way our government's supposed to work. Everyone should be held accountable for their vote. You should see how they're going to vote, and you should be allowed to decide if you like their vote or don't like their vote. But a lot of things pass this way. And they tried to do the intelligence authorization bill the same way, which would authorize all of the intelligence agencies. So when we look at all the things we've seen over the past few years with intelligence agencies going wild, collecting data on innocent Americans, yet they were going to have the Intelligence Authorization Act passed by voice vote as well. And fortunately, that was a case where the Democrats joined me in demanding the yeas and nays. So I had some help on that one. So let me talk about just a couple more things, and then I'll open up for questions. We had a vote on tort reform, and I voted no on this. And even though I'm saying I voted no on all these things, I vote yes more often than I vote no still, just to be clear. But the most interesting ones are these ones where I voted no. So we had this tort reform bill, which was going to be federal tort reform. So with respect to, obviously, medical care, it was tort reform for the medical industry. And I voted no. Because the federal government's not empowered to do tort reform. This is a state level issue. And I support tort reform, but it should be done at the state level, not at the federal level. So you had many of my Republican colleagues who, again, say that they are for enumerated powers in the Constitution, the federal government having a limited role, but when it comes to things like this, they change their tune. And I have a lot of my Democratic colleagues who have the opposite view, but when it comes to something like this, they join me in saying, no, this is a state issue, not a federal issue. So you have this, I think, hypocrisy from both sides. They pick and choose when they think something should be a federal issue and a state issue, based not on any principles, like the Constitution, but based on the outcome that they want. So conservatives, Republicans are in charge of Washington right now, so now they're okay with the federal government handling tort reform, which is a state level topic. And the federal nexus that they were claiming was, well, they should be able to issue tort reform as long as there are any federal dollars involved. Well, if the threshold is just having a federal dollar involved, you can have the federal government handle just about anything, which is not how our Constitution was designed. So I oppose that, and was joined by a lot of Democrats in opposing it, actually. We also had some veterans bills. These bills passed unanimously, but I'll let you know about them briefly. There was one bill that expanded the Veterans Choice Program. This is designed to allow veterans greater access to private healthcare markets. It passed unanimously. I don't think it resolves all the problems our veterans face with their healthcare. They deserve the best healthcare possible. When we send people off to fight wars for us, we should make sure that their healthcare is taken care of when they come back, and when they're at war as well. So I think it's critical that we provide the resources for that and create the best healthcare system possible for our veterans. I also think we should be fighting fewer wars and not putting our men and women in harm's way where they are then in need of as much healthcare when they get back. I think we could reduce the healthcare needs by being more careful about where we get involved overseas. The other veterans bill expanded what's known as the post 9/11 GI Bill. So it just gave them some greater access to benefits through that. And just two more comments before we open up for questions. One is that the House has not passed the budget yet, because the spending bills are supposed to be aligned to the budget. But they can't seem to come to an agreement on the budget, so they are passing spending bills first, and then I guess they'll do the budget later. We'll see. At this point, I'm not even sure what they'll do about the budget, because at some point it becomes unnecessary if you have already passed all the spending bills. What does the budget do at that point? So we'll see what happens with that. And we still haven't taken action on the debt ceiling. We're going to have we're going to hit the debt ceiling at some point. We're approaching about $20 trillion in debt, which is a huge problem. That is the biggest problem our country faces going forward. I think that many of my colleagues, even on my side of the aisle, are going to call for some kind of clean increase in the debt ceiling. I'm absolutely opposed to that. I do not believe you should do a clean debt ceiling increase. You need to reform government. The point of the debt ceiling is not just to raise it. It's like a lot of my colleagues think that the debt ceiling exists just so you can raise it again. But the point of the debt ceiling is to set off alarm bells to tell you there's a problem here and you need to make some reforms. And so I will not support increasing the debt ceiling without major structural reforms to government. They must do it. It's not okay for my side to say, well, now that we have control of the White House and Congress, the debt ceiling doesn't matter anymore. It does matter. And we need to address this debt problem immediately. And I'm willing to support an increase in debt ceiling if it's tied to major structural reforms to government. That's essential, so that we can avoid this problem for future generations, where they will be saddled with debt that we put on them. It's not okay to keep borrowing so that we can sustain our generation while burdening the next generation. So we should address that. Every time we borrow, we are taxing the next generation. It's a tax increase on them. And between the two, I'd rather increase taxes on us than increase taxes on them. I think that's a huge mistake to increase taxes on them. So with that, I'll open it up. And thanks again for being here. And one second. So thanks again for being here. I really appreciate it. I enjoy doing these town halls and hearing from you. And do take your concerns back to Washington. So thank you. Yes.
Mark Brody, I'm from Southeast Grand Rapids, not East Grand Rapids.
Yeah.
I'm a veteran, 76 years old. I have a pacemaker and I have a sleeping machine at home. For the past 7 years, all we've had from Republicans is obstructions. Now you're in charge of the House, the Senate, and the dysfunctional White House. Why can't you get anything done?
I think people deserve an update on what's going on in Washington. That's part of the town hall. And I think that it's critical that people know about these kinds of issues, whether they're procedural issues or other issues. You won't resolve these problems in DC unless the public is aware that these problems exist. So it's really important. It's important to talk. I think you'll be okay. Yes. Yes. What?
You think he'll be okay? What does that mean?
Oh, he's saying all the time.
No, the gentleman, why aren't you getting anything done?
So, if the things out of the House. We've passed many things out of the House. If I were in charge of the House, I would have some different priorities from the current leadership team, but I'm not in charge of the House. I don't decide what comes to the House floor for a vote, and I certainly don't decide what comes to the Senate for a vote. So I do what I can as one of 435 members of the House. Yes.
Mr. Amash, Vermont was scheduled in 2017 to start single-payer universal health care, Medicare for all. Unfortunately, they aborted. Single-payer health care is more cost-effective than multi-payer health care because it gets rid of the insurance companies. My question, sir, is this. Is it not inevitable that, like England and Canada, that somewhere down the road in the United States, we will have universal Medicare for all, single-payer health care?
I think it's important that we have each of the states trying different things. If Vermont wants to try single payer, they're welcome to do so. Nobody's opposed to that. Different states trying different things. And if another state wants to try something else, they're free to do so. That's how our system is designed, so that you have different states trying things and you find maximum happiness for the people of those states. So.
I have a couple of points that are pretty short. Number one, all proposed bills must only include any amendments that are generic or specific to the main topic. Putting in additional addendums that have nothing to do with the main should not happen. There are illegal immigrants who are getting welfare. The cost of what we are paying for their health care, education, etc., is what's making our debt go up. Yes, it is. I believe that if an immigrant comes here, they should be able to prove that they have the finances to support themselves and their families, and that they have a good job. I'm asking him to consider these things for bills that need to come and discussion that needs to come. And the last thing is breaking the law and consequences. When our laws are broken, there must be consequences for everyone. It's beyond my thinking that there are certain people who feel they are too big to have to obey the law, and they need to be protected.
We're not all going to agree on these things. We have to be respectful and polite to each other, please. Yes, I ask that people keep the questions as short as possible, but please also try to be polite to each other. I think that's important. So I agree with you on the one keeping the bills to one topic. So they shouldn't be amending it in a way that changes the topic of the bill or adds really extraneous material. I agree with you on that. As for the costs of illegal immigration, that's not the main driver of our debt. The biggest parts of government are Social Security, and then military spending, then Medicare, then Medicaid. So those are the four biggest parts, and those are not primarily or predominantly illegal immigrants. Those are Americans. So it's paying for ourselves, all these programs, and our military that is driving up the cost of government. And in fact, it's a huge portion of the government. If you look at the discretionary portion of the government, aside from the military, which is also discretionary, but the other discretionary portions are a relatively small portion of the government. So all the stuff that people talk about reforming in D.C. is generally a relatively small portion of the government. The things that often get ignored, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, are a very large portion. So we need to reform those things immediately. And we need to do it in a way that does not affect people currently receiving benefits or about to receive benefits. With the longer you wait to address these issues, the more difficult that will be. You make it to a point where even people who are receiving benefits have to have some reforms to the program. And we don't want to get to that point, but we're getting very close if we don't take action soon. Which goes back to the debt ceiling point I made earlier, that we have to address these things right away. If we don't address it right away, we're going to have a huge problem with the next generation. He says he's got to go.
All right, so first of all, thank you for coming out here. You and I don't disagree, or you and I don't agree on a lot of things, but I respect you for coming here. I also believe that very important. I wrote this out, so I'll give you as soon as the white sheet's getting passed out. So last week, the former head of the Office of Government Ethics, Walter Schwab, said in an interview with The Guardian that President Trump's first 6 months in office have looked like a kleptocracy, which Merriam-Webster defines as government by those who chiefly seek status, personal gain, and the expense of the government. And recently, Pastor Rob Bell stated that you have elected a leader with zero moral compass when questioned about Donald Trump. I question, when Walter Schwab resigning last month, citing problems with the current situation, and the White House refusing basically to turn over so much of the name of appointed officials given ethics waivers, would you agree that the Trump administration's refusal to cooperate with the government or with the Office of Government Ethics undermines the faith in government decision-making and puts a cloud over everything that the White House does? And do you believe that President Trump has a moral compass? And lastly, at what point would you say that he has lost your mind where you would start impeachment?
With respect to the specific question about the government ethics office, I don't know enough about that particular topic or his resignation to comment on that. But I've expressed my concerns about this administration, and I think I've done so adequately and consistently. I could come up with a complaint every day if I wanted to, but I have other things I have to work on too. So.
What's your personal line then? Where has he crossed the line? Where would your personal line be where you would say he's got to go?
In monuments,
I think you have to let Bob Mueller complete his investigation, and I support that investigation. I've supported that, and I've supported an independent investigation, and I've supported every president releasing his tax returns. So I've been one of the few Republicans in support of all these things. I'm not trying to prejudge the outcome. I don't know what the outcome will be, but I do think that it's appropriate given the strange things we've seen certainly if there was some illegality, then that's a problem.
in monuments clause.
An example of illegality?
I want to let the special counsel finish the investigation, and then we can discuss.
Yes, sir.
Further.
I have a question.
I'll get around.
I've been here for like 15 minutes.
So is everyone else.
I live down the street from you.
How do we get people to govern instead of worrying about the election cycles? Because that seems to be a big problem.
So it's very challenging to do that. Most of them just care about getting reelected and are not really willing to break away from their party. I think that to the extent that these parties can be weakened, you will get a more accountable government. It's not because it's not about the two parties working together on everything. It's about the parties dominating so much of their lives. Like when you go to DC, both Republicans and Democrats are so beholden to their party leadership and to the particular donor base of those parties. And it makes it very difficult for them to cooperate on things that they want to cooperate on, or to vote their conscience, to do the right thing. It doesn't mean that they have to vote with the other party. It just means that sometimes the right vote is disagreeing with both parties. But they're afraid to break away because as soon as you do that, the party leadership will maybe kick you off your committees. They will tell donors not to donate to you. So most of my colleagues get their fundraising from PACs and corporate PACs, other special interest groups. Well, they will actually contact, the leadership teams will contact those groups and say, don't donate to this person anymore. And if that person doesn't have an individual donor base, then that makes it very difficult for them to win re-election. In my case, I'm one of the most independent Republicans, so I almost no PAC money. 97% of my fundraising is from individuals pretty consistently. 95 and 99, depending on the cycle. But that's not how it is with most people. So you gotta weaken these parties. And I think if more people said, I don't need to be beholden to one of these parties, that includes people at home, I think that would make a difference. is basically, a copy of the current law with some minor changes. So it's more than 90% the same as the ACA. More than 90% is the same as the ACA. The changes they made were mostly to give states more flexibility. And I've always held that the states should have more opportunity to vary their healthcare system so that you can try different things in different states and see which ones work and which ones don't, rather than having one size fits all for the country. So that's what pushed it over the edge for me, only very slightly. It's still not a popular piece of legislation, and it's not, it's just like the ACA, it's not going to work. Neither the ACA nor that legislation, if they were, this legislation is done, it's not going to pass. Yeah.
Expanded Medicaid is really working. I work with mothers and babies, and I see mothers taking care that would not have gotten care for them and their babies and their families and their husbands or their partners who could not get health care before. I do not feel it's a failure, and I do not think states should choose their own thing, or else we'll never be able to move or go to a different state, or we have to get health care all over again. So I don't agree, but I understand your answer.
The market is going to address a lot of those concerns about traveling between states. It's not, that will not be everything the market will address. But as for Medicaid, I think there are ways to reform the legislation which I had suggested, which would have included keeping the Medicaid expansion, keeping some of the additional spending in exchange for allowing a freer market in health insurance. So you would make health insurance more robust, you allow for a more competitive marketplace there while keeping the Medicaid piece. So I think that's basically, if you're going to do it at the federal level, I think that's basically the direction you have to go. You have to make the healthcare market more vibrant while providing some kind of backstop that also includes people who have pre-existing conditions. As for your comment earlier about infant mortality and other health issues, we have a more diverse country than the vast majority of countries in the world. And I don't think Americans appreciate that enough. That we have the most immigrants of any country in the world. We have the most refugees, despite what you hear about refugees under this administration. We have the most refugees of any country in the world. So we have a very diverse population, and sometimes that does affect our health rates, because people who come in from some of these countries are less healthy. They're not necessarily coming in from countries with great healthcare systems. They're coming here and starting a new life. So that does affect some of the statistics, including our life expectancy statistics. I'll go ahead.
Thank you for coming to here. I'm Olivia Van I'm 14 years old and I go to school here. I have a question about the environment. So in June, President Trump pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement. 196 nations came together to cut down on climate change emissions and limit the rise of global temperatures. This topic is very important to me because I'm a teenager and I don't want the effects of climate change to impact me more than it already has. So my question is, do you believe that the president should have pulled out of this agreement, and what is Congress doing to help fight climate change?
Very good question. So I think the president should have put the issue to the Senate because it's a treaty. When you negotiate an agreement like that with other countries that requires further congressional action under our system and our traditions here, and our Constitution, of course, you have to send that to the Senate for advice and consent. So to consent with the treaty. And he didn't do that, he just pulled out. I think that you could have found some middle ground where he sent it to the Senate and said, do you agree to this? Now many people would be concerned about that because they figure the Senate will reject it. But that is our system of government. legislative ratification, making our country essentially behind the other countries in terms of representative democracy as far as I'm concerned. We don't believe in a system where one person goes and decides these things for everyone. We have a system of checks and balances. So I would go to the Senate, and the agreement itself doesn't have any strict requirements in terms of what any particular country has to do. It has to be implemented by each of the countries, and they have to decide voluntarily to implement it. So considering that it's going to be implemented by Congress, presumably, you should put the question to Congress. If it's approved by the Senate, then you put the question to Congress of how they're going to implement it. So you have to take all those steps. As for what can Congress do to improve the environment, I think you actually improve the environment by making sure that our economy is as strong as possible. That a strong economy is what has made our environment cleaner over the past few decades. We have a cleaner world, and cleaner world because we have technological innovation, which has made things cleaner to produce. So you don't have the same level of pollution because you have a strong economy and you have more competition. Also, better environment.
What is your justification for voting to end the vital consumer protections created by the Dodd-Frank Act?
The bill going on doesn't end consumer protections. It just changes the way the CFPB works, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, so that it becomes more of a, in some sense, like a law enforcement operation, trying to prevent companies to punish companies that do the wrong thing, financial institutions that do the wrong thing. And it also addressed some of the constitutional concerns. Some of the spending was on autopilot, and you had leadership within the CFPB that could not be fired at will. And that's, again, not how our system is supposed to work. You're supposed to have more oversight. So it does modify the CFPB, and it does modify Dodd-Frank, but it doesn't really do away with it. It's just, it's in a modified role now. You don't have to stand all the time.
But what I'm trying to say is, I understand the time to be perfect. The special interest group, because I said it was a congressman, don't run out of special interest group stuff. So my question is, knowing all what you say, knowing what you do, I know separation church, not all. I appreciate for your candidacy towards every concern. But my concern is, how can, I know one person can do it, but what is your plan on really changing? Like with Medicaid and Medicare, if people really do the truth, the healthcare bill is for the working poor. Real poor already need Medicaid and Medicare. So when you explain it up there, talking about how they pile on the bills, that's one reason why everything is misunderstood. So I think we should have more of these. That's why I say there's more people for you than against you. I think you need to identify really who's for you, so we can get behind you and push what's necessary and get rid of all this unnecessary stuff.
Any more questions?
And the question is, I'm looking at it, but it wasn't a question. But see, it's like right now we're having this debate, and we shouldn't be happy. You should let me express myself just like you let everybody else do.
Yeah. You're wrong. But there's a question I can answer to.
The question is, how are you going to do it?
Yeah.
That was the question.
So, specifically about
everything.
everything.
Everything. You are a congressman, aren't you? You represent my area in
stronger public understanding of these issues.
Right.
One member of Congress, just based on votes, can't change much. Based on votes. Because I'm one out of 435, so my one vote out of 435 is not enough to change things. Nor can I persuade enough of my colleagues on any issue to change their votes, because we talked about special interests and other groups. When you ask them, let's say I go up to them with a good point, they say, well, Justin's got a good point, but his point doesn't help me get reelected.
Yeah. So you
That's how they think. So they might agree with me, and many of them do, on a whole bunch of these issues, but they're not going to vote that way. And the only way to get them to vote that way is by educating the public. So part of the reason I do these town halls is that I hope that people here, but also around the country, see it, learn a few things about how Congress operates, and then hold their own representatives accountable. And in fact, it's happened in the past. There are a lot of my colleagues who come up to me and say that they watched my town hall, or some of their constituents did, or they saw their constituents saw a Facebook explanation where I heard an explanation of the bill and then came to their town hall. So it does have an impact, but it's not based on the particular votes I take. It's based on educating the public about what we're doing. That's what makes the biggest difference. Yes.
How do you justify your vote on the sanctions against North Korea, Iran, and Russia? You're one of the representatives that voted no.
It's a great question. So, two of those countries, Iran and North Korea, we voted on sanctions in the past, and I've supported many of those sanctions. And in fact, the North Korea sanctions are identical to sanctions we already voted on, and I've supported. The Iran sanctions were mostly okay. There was some debate within my office. We had a reason the bottom of this issue because there were enough problems with Russian sanctions and other parts of the bill. But the Iran sanctions arguably could have caused problems for that previous agreement that the United States had made with Iran, which I said before had problems. Nonetheless, people accepted it as an agreement, and these sanctions, some believe, would contradict that agreement and cause us to be in breach of that agreement. So there were some concerns there. But the real problem was two elements. But let me just explain some background. Sanctions, how I view sanctions. I have supported sanctions when they're aimed at stopping the spread of weapons of mass destruction or the production of weapons of mass destruction. Sometimes bills are all about that. Sometimes the sanction bill is overwhelmingly focused on weapons of mass destruction. And I support those sanctions. Other times, though, the bills are focused on things like basketballs. Like no shipping back, believe it or not, basketballs or motorcycles or other things. And so when those are the items being sanctioned, I've been against it. I don't think that those kinds of sanctions are particularly helpful. I don't think it stops anyone from producing weapons of mass destruction or harming the United States. I don't think they have much of an impact on those countries, except to make them perhaps more beholden to whatever dictator they have. So I oppose that kind of stuff. With respect to the Russia sanctions, the sanctions were far too broad and too undefined. And when I say that, what I mean is they gave the Treasury Secretary of the United States very broad discretion to sanction all sorts of things. And the bill itself does not specify what can be sanctioned. So I think a sanctions bill like that is not conducive to a good outcome down the road. I think that it's too broad, gives our executive branch too much power, and ultimately harms U.S. foreign policy. But there's one other part of that bill besides sanctions. Again, they like to tell everyone it's a sanctions bill and it's a Russia sanctions bill. They attached another bill to this bill. And was a bill that I had advocated strongly against previously. And this was a bill related to the Fourth Amendment, which allows the government to do geographic targeting so that they can collect financial data on Americans without a warrant, without probable cause. And I previously actually issued a statement in opposition to this bill. This bill came up in 2016, and we fought against it on the House floor. And they attached this bill to the sanctions bill. So I wasn't going to vote for a bill that one had problematic sanctions on Russia. It was too broad, too undefined. I think when you write sanctions, you should be very specific about what you're trying to do. And then on top of it, there was a bill attached to it that I previously advocated very strongly against. It violates the Fourth Amendment. And I've been, since I've been here, the champion of the Fourth Amendment, trying to protect people's right to privacy. I wasn't about to vote for a bill that would violate your right and allow the government to collect data on you without a warrant, without probable cause.
Thank you. I totally agree with you about the debt ceiling, but I disagree with you about the way to fix it. And I'm wondering about your ideas having to do with taxes and the economy. One could argue that by having universal health care, for example, we're actually helping the economy because a strong economy is a thriving middle class that buys products. And when we have universal health care, people don't have to go into bankruptcy because they have medical debt. Small businesses can provide, they don't have to provide health care anymore, so it saves them money. And I'm just wondering how reforming all these programs and not raising taxes is going to lead to a healthier economy.
From my perspective, when you're negotiating our debt problem, trying to bring it down, everything is on the table. So every issue should be on the table, taxes should be on the table, all of these large programs should be on the table, military spending should be on the table. I wouldn't take anything off the table in that discussion. I think it would be irresponsible to say we're not going to do X, Y, or Z when we talk about reforming our debt. So I'm happy in a true negotiation. I'm happy with the other side, whether it's my own party or Democrats, because at different times they're the other side. As long as everyone's coming in with that understanding, I think that everything should be on the table.
So my quick follow-up question is then, when you voted for the Trump Care plan, many perceive that to be a big tax cut for the rich because it was basically giving them a break so they didn't have to subsidize what I consider to be a pretty successful social program. And was everything on the table then, or was it just one thing at a time?
Yeah, so I looked at the whole bill, and yes, the bill has tax cuts, and it has other things in it, and there are many parts of the bill I don't like, and some parts I do like. So I had to look at the whole bill, and I had to compare it to our current system. And for me, it was marginally better than our current system.
Isn't that really the same thing? I mean, there were certainly, a lot of agree people you wanted things, or at least North Korea. And so I'm assuming that you probably would approve of some sanctions against Russia for valid reasons? I hope so. Okay, but the whole bill you say, well, so with the ACA you do what thing?
Well, with the sanctions bill, in addition to the Russia sanctions being too high, we have a major constitutional issue for me.
Well, right.
When you have a constitutional issue, that gets more weight than the other issues.
But ultimately, the constitutional issue, is that something the Supreme Court should rule on? I mean, obviously, you could file suit if you didn't like it, as well as any other American.
So the way our system works, the way our system of government works, each branch has to interpret the Constitution and follow the Constitution. It's not left to the Supreme Court to handle it. If you leave things to the Supreme Court, you are violating your own oath of office, which says that you will support and defend the Constitution. So I will always stand up for the Constitution, always vote what I believe is constitutional.
Even above people's health?
The Constitution has to come first, absolutely. Because the Constitution has to come first. Because in a system where you don't would support some sanctions against the country, but it was attached to another piece of legislation that is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. I'm not going to support it. That I was defend. I did that to defend the Constitution. Yes.
So I'm hearing you say that in the governmental system that we have, a lot of things get manipulated based on whether or not a person is going to be reelected, between sort of paths and other things. There's been a lot of talk about term limits, and I'm wondering, also having studied the Constitution, studied a lot of the Founding Fathers documentation, it appears to me from that study that our Founding Fathers did support term limits. They didn't want people to be spending and being career politicians. What are, in your mind, the pros and cons for term limits?
It's a great question. I can say that the framers of the Constitution did not support term limits, first of all, just to get that out of the way, because it's not in the Constitution. So if they supported it, it would be in the Constitution. Nonetheless, I do support term limits. I think that they should be of the right length. When I served in the State House, the term limits, in my opinion, were too short. You were allowed to serve 3 two-year terms, which led to a lot of problems. Because what happened is nobody really understood how to be a legislator anymore, because the knowledge was not passed on. The members of the body were very frequently confused about parliamentary procedure. They had to rely on staff and lobbyists and others who had been there for longer to tell them exactly what to do. And I think that causes a lot of issues as a legislator. The pros were that because you had relatively short term limits, the egos were smaller, because nobody had been there for a long time. So everyone was pretty new. And I think that your colleagues at the state level, when I was in the State House, treated you more as an equal, even when you first got there, than they do in Congress. In Congress, where you have some people who serve 30 years, or John Dingell served 59 years. He'd served a long time. So, and I think his dad had served before him, and now his wife serves. So, when you have that situation, and I'm not trying to pick on John Dingell, he's a nice guy, and he has a great Twitter account. If you don't follow him, you should follow John Dingell. But for people who serve like a really long time, like 30 years, they look down on the people who just come in. So it's very hard to get new ideas implemented, because they think they know everything. They've been there for 30 years, and they say they've seen it all, and they've tried it all, and they don't listen to you when you have suggestions, because they say, well, we tried that back in 1977 or whatever. And that's a problem. So there are pros and cons to term limits. I think a good term limit amount might be, if you're going to amend the Constitution, then probably you should change the terms of the House to 4-year terms instead of 2-year terms. Because right now what happens is members of Congress spend about 1 year legislating and then 1 year campaigning. And maybe they spend at least 3 years legislating before they start campaigning then. So you get 3 out of 4 years instead of 2 out of 4 years. Even if you want to legislate, even if I wanted to, like next year, be there legislating, what happens is the leadership team doesn't want you there. They send you home. They want you on the campaign trail. So I've changed to 4-year terms, and maybe have 3 4-year terms in the House, and then 2 6-year terms in the Senate. And that seems like it would be a reasonable compromise. And I could accept some variation on that, give or take a term or something, one way or the other. But I think that's pretty reasonable. Yes.
Congressman, Tom and I are both.
studied the reduction in the choice of people on welfare because of the Medicaid expansion. Before you vote for another harsh bill, look at what they say, bring in some experts on it, and just listen to them and see what they have to say. More importantly, and I listened to the debates, well, that's right, there were no debates. More importantly, I really would like you to do a favor for us. How many people here are for bipartisanship? There is a committee, as you know, there's a committee right now of 40 representatives, 20 Democrats and 20 Republicans that are meeting today to discuss trying to work out a health care solution that would be okay with Democrats and with Republicans. They have suggestions they want to put on the floor. They need more votes. I would like you to join that bipartisan committee. I'm sure you're aware of it. I'd like you to look up on the caucus and not see that caucus on your website.
I'll take a look at that committee. I'm not sure if it's an official committee or
It's not.
it's not an official committee.
Not undertaken.
Okay.
Caucus.
Yeah, caucus. So I can tell you that when we looked at the healthcare bill, first of all, I did spend time speaking to experts on both sides. I didn't speak to U of M professors. I do frequently contact U of M professors on a number of constitutional issues, though. But I spoke with some experts, and we brought in people on from all perspectives. I brought in people who were very far to the left, and also some who were libertarian, and some who were conservative. We talked to these people as an office to try to get a sense for what were the big concerns and how we can make it work. I also know that when we looked at the healthcare legislation, we spent a long time trying to work with the people in the Tuesday group, and these are the Republicans who are considered more to the left of the rest of the conference. And we spent a lot of time trying to work with them, and we got a lot of pushback. So I'm in the House Freedom Caucus, as many of you know, even though we have disagreements quite often. But we got a lot of pushback from the people on the left of the conference who didn't really want to have these discussions. Now, ultimately, Tom MacArthur, who was in the Tuesday group, came up with that MacArthur Amendment, which is what ultimately got the bill passed in the House. That was considered an idea from the left side of our conference. It was not from the conservatives. That was from the Tuesday group, who are, the legislators from mostly like New England and northeastern states. So I agree with you, though, on working with everyone. I've said before we should work together. I do think we should start over. I do think we should repeal the ACA. But I think we should start over and all work together. And I think we can find some proposal that will work for everyone. But as you've seen with what we're doing in Congress, it is very hard to make these small changes to the ACA. Because mostly like the AHCA, the Republican bill in the House, mostly were small changes to the AHCA. These were not major changes. And yet, this is the problem, is that people on both sides were led to believe that it was something it wasn't. People on the right were promised that it was a repeal of the ACA when it was no such thing. And people on the left were told that it was a catastrophe and it was a total repeal of ACA and we have to fight it. Neither side was right about this. The changes were relatively minor, but the reason some people have concerns about it is because when you make these changes, you have to change other parts. You can't just pull one part out without having the whole thing start to crumble. So I think we really have to just go with a totally different design. I do believe we can put together a design that is bipartisan, that would have the support of both sides. I do think
go back to like the very first comment that was made, and also your 25 minutes of updates in the government. You said a lot of they did, they said, they did this. And you pretty much threw everybody under the bus there so that you wouldn't have to accept responsibility for who are they. This is our Congress, and we should have a definitive answer on who they are in obstructing that justice. And then second, I wanted to ask you, how many focus groups or roundtables have you personally held from your constituents on health care? My other question is, this is your fourth town hall I have been to. And I hear people asking you, what do you believe? We elected you, and you're supposed to be representing us. And every town hall that I have attended overridingly disagrees with you on this healthcare issue. Why will you not represent us on this?
I can answer that last one first. We have a district here that is over 700,000 people. This town hall and other town halls are not.
It is a highly gerrymandered district. Voters, not politicians.
So, I was going to clear up another thing. It is gerrymandered to make the district more democratic than it otherwise would be. Absolutely. This was even admitted by the people who did the redistricting. This district would actually be more Republican if you. This is used throughout the country as one of the most gerrymandered districts, and what's wrong with politics today. Okay, that's just not true. So it was redistricted to make it more democratic than it otherwise would be. And if you look at the map, I know we're going to just look at the map, and look at the previous district and look at the current district. The areas around Grand Rapids, Republican suburbs around Grand Rapids, were removed from the district, and Calhoun County, a Democratic county, was added to the district. That was done intentionally to make the district more democratic, not more Republican. So if you had a district that was more natural geographically, in other words, if you kept Kent County intact, and maybe added one more county like Barry or Ione, which have long been in this district, the district would be more Republican than it currently is. So that is absolutely false, what she's saying. It was gerrymandered to make it more democratic, not more Republican. And it's the Republicans who gerrymandered it that way. The Republicans gerrymandered it that way because they were coming after me. They were coming after me, and they gerrymandered it to make it more democratic, to make it more difficult for me.
Not more democratic, less Republican.
Well, the same
it's still Republican. It's still Republican.
So, in any case, that's the reality of the district. You can read about that because it's been written about in books and in articles. As for who the they is in Washington, you have Republican leadership, you have Democratic leadership, you have the White House at times, you have lobbyists and special interests. There is a coalition of people over there who work against the American people, trying to hide what we're voting on, trying to prevent us from doing our jobs properly. And it's been a problem since I've been there. And it hasn't mattered whether it's been Republicans in charge or Democrats in charge, you've had the same problem. So that's why I encourage people to say they don't need to be part of either of those parties. They can decide they want to be independent and be separated from these parties. I think if you held the parties more accountable that way, things would change. Now, in the state of Michigan, we have a system that strongly favors the party at election time. You have straight ticket voting. That makes it very difficult to run for office if you're not part So that's another thing you could look at. Reforming election law to make it easier to run as an independent in this state. So what was your second part?
About the healthcare, why you have not voted the way your constituents
Yes. So my constituents are more than 700,000 people. They are not just the people in this room or just the people that I go to at town hall. If you want me to base it on what I hear at town halls, then if you go back to the previous term, you would find that my town halls had many Republicans who were telling me all sorts of things about President Obama and stopping him and all, and arguing for things that I'm sure many of you would disagree with. I don't just take those ideas and say, well, I'm just going to go to Washington and vote with that group just because they were the ones showing up at my town hall. You have to take into consideration everyone in the district. I represent everyone. And maybe you'll be surprised to find that there are a lot of Republicans in this district too. It's not just Democrats. And there are a lot of conservative people in this district. And I have to represent every single person. So that's what I'll continue to do as a representative. And I've been very independent, and that's why I will continue to be an independent advocate for everyone in the district. Yes.
Thank you for not taking me out of my offer to beg. I did offer to beg. First, I'd like to recognize that you do make an effort to come out here and face us and pursue accountability. And we appreciate you doing that for the sake of doing your job. Now, you have a set of principles. And in Grand Rapids and your district, we are principled people. Yes? Now, I'd like to distinguish between principles that perhaps your constituents share and the principles that you defend. You are a strong proponent of states' rights. Many people like the sound of states' rights, and it is encouraging to us that we do have the option of states' rights to help us out of the debacle that Washington, D.C. often puts us in. However, at each of your town halls, I hear people on both sides of the aisle, and I see on your Facebook as well, really anything to do with your rogue Republican libertarian thing. There are people all over the place that want you to do the opposite of what you're doing. Now, I don't think that's because people want fully states' rights, or people want fully federal representation. People want you to make their lives better.
10th Amendment.
In this area, I hear over and over people imploring you to vote in our best interests. In our area, we are coming together. We're not putting up more walls. We're not making more divisions. We're walking around town halls and talking to one another and finding common ground. And I ask you, sir, to support us in doing that by voting in our best interests. Now, I want to tell you just briefly, and thank you in here. When I stood on a bridge at a healthcare rally, I think perhaps your staff was watching, and your staff does a lot of great things for our community. Thank you, Catherine Condon. When I said Justin Amash is a human being, and I'd like him to look me in the eye and tell me that my life matters. I have a pre-existing condition that I have a hard time talking about because for years I was in my house with drapes closed with chronic migraines. This year in January, I reached my out-of-pocket. January. And thanks to the ACA, I'm standing here today. I'm not at home, I'm working, and I'll tell you, with my condition, I often have to save up for 2 days a week to be able to get out of the house. And when we come to town, I save them up every time. Because it's so important that we let our congressmen know that you work for us.
I don't know if you want a response, but I appreciate that. And I'm here to hear your concerns and to listen and to take that back to Washington. I promise you I do my best to do that in a way that is reflective of the whole community. I encourage you everyone to take a look at some of the votes I take and to recognize that I don't have to take the votes I take. I will upset my party oftentimes with the votes I take. But I do what I believe in. I was the one Republican against Kate's law because I thought it had a constitutional problem. I was one of the only Republicans to vote no on a transgender military amendment because I thought it was a problem to vote no on that amendment. So I've taken tough votes that I don't have to take. They don't help me get elected in this district. This is still a Republican district. It does not help me get elected to take those votes. It doesn't help me to take those votes. But I do it because I'm trying to reflect the principles I ran on, following the Constitution, and trying to represent everyone in this district. And I know that we're not always going to agree, and that sometimes I'll disappoint you with some of my votes, and sometimes I'll upset you because you care a lot about a particular issue and it really affects you personally. And I understand that and respect that, and I do take that all into consideration and try to do my best to represent everyone in the district to the best of my ability. Thanks.
One of very few.
Can I still go back to the bridge close?
Thank you, Justin, for coming to see us. We talk about healthcare, and I respect that you think the Constitution is what it's all about, and states' rights are so important, and I'm sure that they are. But our country is composed of many different states, and some states are much poorer than other states. And the people in those states might not be able to have the same care that the people in the rich states get to have if we don't have a system that is universal, that works the same for all people in our country, not just one state after the other after the other. And that is where you guys have to step up and say, our whole country deserves to have good health care, regardless of where you're from, country, city, big state, little state, rich state, poor state. Same with education.
Amen.
I'm very disturbed with what's going on in Washington, all the infighting and the constant lying. I just wonder why they don't have an emergency election to get Mr. Trump out of everything.
because you've committed yourself now to supporting all of this stuff in a bill that's got a whole bunch of different projects. So I try not to commit myself on that stuff. I've told you before that I didn't support zeroing it out, which is what the president did. But I also didn't want to make a commitment about a particular level of funding or try to elevate it to the point where it's implied that I won't support the bill unless it's funded that particular way.
Do I understand that you do support the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative? Great.
Just going back to, you were mentioning Social Security, Medicare, that sort of thing, taking such a large part of the budget. And you talked about reforming, which of course is a euphemism for cutting benefits. And you said everything's on the table. Why don't I ever hear anybody mention what would seem to me to be the simplest solution is just lift the cap.
Lift the cap.
On the income that is taxed.
I am for everything on the table and being on the table discussion, including that. So I don't have any objection to any of these things being negotiated as part of it. I would be willing to support it as part of a negotiation. Would I support it as a standalone? It won't resolve the problem by itself. So as part of a negotiation, I'm willing to support just about anything. Because I think you have to look at all these things and you have to resolve them together. I don't think you should I don't think when you look at an issue like Social Security or Medicare, that you should try to piecemeal it and just fix one little part. Because what happens then, you fix that part and then someone grumbles about fixing the other part. You just got to do it together, fix the entire problem, and find out where you can discover where you can compromise. Well, it can get fixed if you put the pressure on your representatives to work on it. And contact your senators. Ask your senators to hold the town hall and talk to them as well. I don't think they held one town hall in 2017 or forever.
Thanks so much. So I am the parent of a child with disabilities, and I'm also a disability advocate. And I wanted to piggyback off of something you said as well. Okay, yeah, so we know what we're thinking. And I just wanted to go back to what you said was part of your philosophy and your framework, which is that you felt like you needed to target the 5 greatest expenditures of government. And you mentioned Social Security, of course there's the military, and then there's Medicaid, Medicare, and here's the problem with most of them other than the military, is that they target those prices and the costs are rising because our population is growing. I mean, not just people living longer, but we have more people. We have a lot of people who are diagnosed with disabilities that are increasing, and they're becoming adults as well. So, to cut Medicaid, which serves people with disabilities, is just kind of inhumane, especially considering the population is growing. Just inhumane. It doesn't work, but the solution is not to cut what is necessary, but to focus on, similarly, as you had mentioned, how do you increase your budget? And maybe that's where the focus should be, and not on the cutting, but on the budget. And then when you think about taxes, I mean, just go back in history and know that taxes used to be different, and those who earn more were taxed more at one point in history. And
I have a few comments on that. First, there are lots of people in this district and elsewhere in the country who would look at that list and say, well, the one thing you shouldn't touch is military spending. That should be going up, and you should try to reform the other things. So I want to make sure everyone understands that. I get that pressure
just have to look at what people I believe we're trying to get a state amendment to make districting done by independent commission, which then the legislature will look down. Would you support that kind of a process for the state of Michigan?
So if it's a good proposal, I would support it. And the reason I say that, well, if it's a good proposal, I don't want to support a bad proposal, honestly. But I want to be clear about what I stand for. I don't support partisan gerrymandering. I don't like what we do now. I don't like it because of what I explained earlier. I mean, I have my own interest in it too. They tried to make my district more democratic than it otherwise would be. So they tried to attack me with it. But setting that aside is a bad idea for the whole state. And you bring up the 14th district and other districts, and they are severely gerrymandered. And our district is less gerrymandered than those districts because some of those are shaped like a ring around areas. And that shouldn't happen. So I support nonpartisan redistricting. So it should be independent, but what we don't really want is a forced evenness. So the districts shouldn't be drawn to be 50-50. They should be drawn to be whatever the community is. So like, if an area is Democratic, then so be it. If an area is Republican, so be it. It should be nonpartisan. I think to some extent,
nonpartisan doesn't exist. It's either one or the other.
So to some extent, I lost my train of thought.
I agree with you.
It should work kind of like when they calculate metropolitan statistical areas, right? They don't think about who's Republican, who's Democrat. They just think about who drives generally in that area, what's the general, community. And that's how it should work.
And the state legislature is Republican.
Thank you. What will you do when Trump fires Robert Mueller?
Training. Training to be a circulator. Yeah. It was also in East Lansing.
I will certainly speak out against it if he does that. I will speak out against that, and I will obviously consider the context and circumstances of it. So I wouldn't want to say anything further than that. I will definitely,
to go on the
under the current conditions, I would not be happy with it. Now, as
redistricting to be done by
we have an executive branch that is supposed to be controlled by the president. When you look at the Constitution, the executive branch in some sense is the president. So he has the authority to fire people. But I don't think that he should do it for ethical reasons, for rule of law reasons.
The Board of Canvassers is sort of dragging
He should allow the investigations to be independent, and he shouldn't impose his will on it because he doesn't like a particular outcome. So what will you do? I'm prepared to do whatever is necessary.
When I went to polls last November, there was an R in front of your name for Republican. I didn't vote for you. Now, can you tell me how long
you know, I didn't vote for either major candidate for president. So I've had my concerns from the beginning, we continue to have concerns, but I can't speak for the rest of them or make anyone do anything. I think both parties have serious problems, and I think to be blunt about it, I think the Democratic Party would do the same exact thing if they had a similar situation. It is the sad reality of our politics that people are so partisan. People are so partisan. I didn't realize how partisan people were until I got into this job. And saw how partisan people. People care mostly about getting the outcome they want and don't care that much about principles. And they typically care about principles only when it's going after the other side. And then as soon as their side's doing it, they don't care. This is for Republicans and Democrats. And it's the sad reality of our situation. And if we can get out of this mindset as a people, we will have a much better future.